You're listening to Resistance Radio.
You're listening to the Resistance Report with your hosts Nick Griffin and Jack Sen.
Well, hello. I'm your host, Nick Griffin, and this is Resistance Radio. And you're very welcome to this edition of Resistance Reports. I'm joined today by Jack Sen, co-founder of Resistance Radio, activist and author. Welcome, Jack.
Hello, Nick. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, smashing. Thank you very much. Now, subject for today, Islam. You can't turn on a TV or pick up a newspaper. Well, actually, I hope that listeners don't pick up newspapers. You know, it only encourages the lying bastards. So simply look at it online. But however you get your news, you can't avoid the question of Islam and Muslims behaving badly in many cases. So it's a very important topic about which much rubbish is said and much truth is suppressed. So, Jack, I thought we'd start off this conversation about Islam and the future by perhaps looking a little bit at the situation in America post the election of Donald Trump on this issue.
Yeah, I think that's really important. What's transpired in the United States with President Trump getting elected is that the issue of Islam has become a legitimate issue, and we've seen that state officials can now confront this issue head on without calling the people that cause the problems terrorists or fundamentalists or we had a president for 8 years in the United States who refused to use the word Islamic terrorists. We now have a president in the United States that actually says Islam might be a problem. So that's a massive switch. I mean, even George Bush, if you remember correctly, after 9/11, regardless of whether Islam was behind it or it was the Zionists behind the Muslims, he did state on the record that we can't blame Islam. Islam is a religion of peace. That carried over with Obama, who basically is pro-Islamic or a pro-Islamic fundamentalist. We now have a president in the United States who's legitimized the criticism of Islam as a dangerous ideology and not just a religion. It's an actual ideology that's based on proselytizing people through violence.
Yes. Do you think that in doing that, Trump is leading the field, or is he following where the public was already?
I can imagine when Donald Trump would sit home with his wife and his kids, they would talk about these issues and they would say things similar to what we would say. So I think that, he's genuinely concerned about Islam being dangerous to his beloved United States. And obviously he's a populist, and I'm sure he has gauged public opinion, and the vast majority of Americans believe Islam is dangerous. Even people on the left. I have friends who are on the left, and they're very concerned with Islam. I know someone who I went to university with who's now actually a practicing homosexual. We don't speak that often, but he constantly comments on Facebook on my anti-Islamic posts, and he always gives me the thumb up. And he's a liberal, and he's obviously fearful of how Islam views people who are different from them and who don't prescribe to their ideology. So yes. I think we're going to find a lot of women moving forward as well when they start to realize that their lives are in danger, that if our laws change and if the Islamic ideology does make headway in the West, that they're in danger. They recognize that as well.
Yeah, it's not a question of if it makes headway, it is making headway.
True.
In terms of ideology, demography and everything. It's interesting what you're saying about the left in the USA. Although, of course, here in Britain, and I guess in the rest of Europe, the noisy left is still as Islamophile and cowardly as ever. I equally know that there's people on the left, including people hardcore opponents of the BNP in the past and so on, who have now realised that effectively they've made a terrible mistake, and that this thing is indeed a problem. Not just for us and for ordinary people, it's a problem for their ideology, it's a problem for homosexuals, it's a problem for any woman, and a massive problem for our society. And it is sinking in. I know we think of the left as incredibly stupid and blinkered, which of course they often are.
But they're not monolithic. They're not monolithic.
Even amongst them, that's it, they're not monolithic. It is starting to sink in. It's a very interesting change that's going on. If it's happening in the States as well as here, it must be happening everywhere.
It definitely is happening in the States, and I think what's important is that the left, although they're not monolithic, they do tend to follow left-wing media outlets. So if those outlets are constantly, just discussing how Islam is a religion of peace and how we can't be racist and we have to make sure we don't, put all Muslim people in one basket, then they'll kind of follow those talking points and agree. However, if there are people on the left who start to say, well, there is cause for concern and we do have to confront these issues, I think then the leftists who are themselves fearful and at home might privately say things, although I'm a liberal, I do think this way, and I do believe there's a problem, and I agree. Let me give you an example. There's a gentleman I spoke with, I mentioned him earlier. He was calling Trump a racist to me in a conversation we had. I said, well, how's he a racist? And he then really couldn't give me any examples of anything racist that he said. And then we started talking about black and white issues, and he did say to me that, perhaps the right is correct on blacks failing regardless of all the opportunities they're given. And this is someone who's a hardcore liberal. And he's recognizing that no matter how much money is spent in black communities, that the same outcome. It's the same outcome always. It's failure, it's crime, it's broken homes. And he did say he not sure what the problem is. He didn't say that it was because they're being underfunded, like a leftist would say. And he didn't say because they're black, as someone on the right might say. But he certainly seemed to be struggling with this idea that it's our fault they're failing. So I think gradually the people on the left are waking up to these issues.
Yeah, and I think if they're waking up on, if you like, racial issues, then they're certainly waking up even more on the Islamic question. Right. So President Trump's there. We can assume that if he follows through on his election promises, which he seems to be, I would say, looking from a distance, that Islamic immigration in America is going to come to at least a grinding slowdown. Yeah. And of course, America has, although a significant Muslim population, nothing like that, which has engulfed Western European nations. So there is a big difference between the Americans and the rest of the West in this regard. But what do you think, since Trump is talking about Islam and terrorism and the rest, how do you think this will influence his foreign policy and as the government progresses? Yeah,
we discussed this earlier. This is the first president in generations who's had an isolationist, is more presenting an isolationist foreign policy, meaning although he's certainly not, I don't believe he's going to send troops into Syria to join Russia and battle ISIS. He's certainly sending a message to Russia that their anti-Islamic fundamentalist foreign policy and their pro-Syrian foreign policy is something he supports. Whether he's going to actually join in the effort or not, I don't know. But it's exact opposite of what we've seen with Bush and Obama and would have seen with Clinton, which is a hostility towards Russia and almost a pro-Islamic fundamentalist foreign policy. Yeah. Is that what you see too?
Yes. Yeah. It produces a very interesting sort of paradox that the Democrat and, for that matter, Republican establishments who throughout the election campaign and the minute Trump actually takes measures to get a grip on particularly Islamic immigration, they're all going to scream Islamophobe at him and hater and all the rest. But these are the people who, between them, murdered an estimated 3 million Iraqis in the course of the sanctions and then the wars and the trouble since. So they'll talk a talk, but when it actually comes down to it, it's going to be this very paradoxical situation where an is, quote, Islamophobic, unquote, president actually hopefully stops America killing Muslims.
Certainly. And I mean, when you speak to Iraqis and when you see the misery that's been perpetrated against their people, I mean, you can't help but feel sorry for them. It is our fault. We're behind all of this. So yes. I think at this stage, and something you mentioned earlier, that we need to leave them to it and almost apologize for the mess, maybe help them rebuild to a certain extent, but leave them to it at this point, and we need to get out of their business.
Yes, yeah. I think that, and it does look now, well, with Trump, that's what is going to happen, and I've no doubt that the Brits, the French, and so on, they won't want to, or even have the capability to go facing up to Russia and interfering in the Middle East if the big brother United States isn't either with them in the front or backing them up. So I think that the whole West probably is going to move away from the cycle of confrontation and interference in the Middle East. Yeah. So that's a good thing. But of course, as you know, although the constant news coverage of the tragedy in Iraq and the horror in Syria and so on is something which has helped to radicalize sections of the Muslim community in the West. It's not just that, because even if none of that was going on, there is very clearly within Islam, or at least the Salafist Wahhabi reading of Sunni Islam, there's an extremely aggressive imperialistic streak, and they would be attacking us if we carpet bomb them with money and sweets, quite frankly.
Which is true. Yeah, that's why, raise the drawbridge and exclude them from Western societies at the end of the day. It's just, it does not mix. Everywhere Islam has gone, whether it's India or now Western Europe, they have wreaked havoc, carnage, and just destroyed everything in their path. I mean, they're not going to be satisfied until they convert every single last person. That's the nature. I'll tell you something interesting. I have a friend who rang me from Dublin, and he actually, if you remember, Nick, he's the one who made our little film back last, I think it was February.
Yes, indeed.
And he told me he was walking down the street the other day, and there's a 15-story building in Dublin that just got put up, and it's called the Saudi Arabian Cultural Center. There's a wall around it. There are cameras everywhere. He could see guards standing in front of it. No one knows what's going on in there. But there's Islamic writing all over the outside, and he said to him it looks like a jihadist headquarters.
Huh.
This is in the center of Dublin. I mean, 15-story high.
Yes, stories. Of course, you see very similar things in every major Western city, and the giant mosques. We'll take a break in a moment. I'd just like to finish off on this piece by saying that an old Sikh friend of mine a number of years ago said that everywhere they build these buildings, whether they're mosques, cultural centres, or whatever they're disguised as, in the end, in his experience, the experience of his people, in the end, they're arms depots and the places where these people assemble before they go out on jihad. Now, people might say that's an extreme position. I would say that's an elderly Sikh speaking from the experience of his people, and it's a warning that people in the West shouldn't just ignore out of hand, at the very least. So, Jack, thanks for this conversation so far. We'll take a break now so the listeners can go and do whatever they do in a break. Hopefully also listen to the adverts, a little bit of music. We'll be back shortly. Do be back yourselves.
Hi, this is Russ with ResistanceRadio.tv. Thank you for sharing your time with us for the first part of this edition of the Resistance Report. If you want to listen to the other part or parts of Nick Griffin and Jack Sen discussing this issue, please become a paying subscriber. While I would love to be able to give you this for free, it is simply impossible with all of the overhead of running such a high-profile, high-traffic website. I'm sure you can imagine what I'm talking about. The next part or parts of this are fantastic and reveal more of what ResistanceRadio.tv is about. We look forward to sharing more of our time and ideas with you. See you on the inside.